Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Hugh Mason, and that was the mellow sound of open innovation brought to you by PIER71. Particularly mellow start for all of the Zoom conferences I've done the last few weeks. Anyway, thank you all for joining us. I see there's about 20 people here. I think we have about 30 to 40 registered, so maybe a couple more will join in the next few minutes. Let me give you some background on what we're going to do. I'd like to introduce our two guests first of all. Nakul, do you want to say hi? You're the Vice President of Open Innovation Marine Products at Wilhelmsen Ships. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. As you mentioned, I'm VP for Open Innovation in Marine Products within Wilhelmsen Ship Service. And my background really is on product development and product management across our core business. But we've very consciously and very particularly opted to create an open innovation function last year. It's coming on to its first birthday, so kind of timely to have this conversation. We're doing a number of corporate venture builds, both internally, but also in partnership and also in spin out and externally as well. So using the entire philosophy, I guess, of several frameworks that we're probably going to talk about a bit later on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And I should say that this is one of several webinars in the PIER71 Explore series. I think it's important to share it with a wider audience, though, because the learning that's come about here between corporates and startups trying to work together across quite a big cultural boundary is very important. Kristian Andreasen, you're the founder of Kanda. Last year in 2019, you were part of the Singapore Port Challenge. You were in the finals for that. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Yeah, so I'm very happy to be here today. So Kanda is developing mainly virtual reality and tablet-based training, very much focused on the maritime and pharmaceutical sector. I have a background in software engineering, but it's quite a few years since I've done any development. And I think our developers are quite happy for that. It was never really my forte. So I'm more on the partnership and sales side of the company today and my main work area.
And we're wondering whether you've actually ever got the chance to visit Singapore on this program. I think it's been challenging with COVID-19.
Yeah, so we were there for the Smart Port Challenge, and we were scheduled to move to Singapore back in October, but that was before COVID happened. So now we're just waiting for permission to come back to Singapore.
Fantastic. Well, we're all looking forward to having you with us. Just to give an outline, we have about an hour together today, and I thought perhaps what we do is talk for maybe 40 minutes and then move it into a Q&A. At any point during our conversation, please, anyone on the call, feel free to just post questions in the Q&A below, and either I'll deal with those as we move forward if it seems to be fitting in with the flow of questions, or we'll deal with them at the end. We're going to have this discussion in three sections, basically. What we will do, first of all, is talk about some of the reasons why a corporate and why a startup went into this open arrangement kind of structure. I think why is terribly important. Secondly, we'll move on to how the process worked, what didn't work about the process so far. And finally, it'd be great to move into a discussion about what advice both of our participants would have about for anyone who's thinking about entering this from either side of this equation. So, as I say, along the way, please post questions. Just before we start, I wanted to share a sort of a mental model with you. I gave a briefing for this year's set of corporations who are coming in and thinking about open innovation back in February. And I wanted to share that with you, just a couple of slides from it now, so that we can all have the same sort of mental model. Just checking here that you can see this. You should see a slide that says Singapore case studies, and I'm hoping, yeah, I'm seeing a thumbs up from Kristian on that one. So if for anyone who's based in Singapore at the moment, you'll know that open innovation is a thing. Every organization is running open innovation, it seems. Everybody from across many different sectors. And of course, it's not a new idea. The actual concept of people collaborating to innovate goes back hundreds of years. There are even some references, people like Benjamin Franklin was doing this back in the 18th century in America. I found it interesting. I've been talking with a couple of colleagues who are specialists in this. And one of the mental models they have for it is that innovation takes place in circles of action. When you actually get people coming together, the front line of innovation is all about people working together to actually do something real and concrete. That's what they call a circle of action. But the circles of action typically take place within or in the boundaries between two kind of communities of interest. Normally you have these sort of communities in any sort of ecosystem. So in the maritime sector, you might have ship owners and operators, and you might have the petrochemical sector. And within each of those, there is innovation going on, of course, within companies and between companies. And often you get these interesting points where two communities overlap. That's often where some of the most interesting kind of innovations happen. And I think you could say perhaps in this Smart Port Challenge, we've got an overlap between the startup community and the maritime established sector. This is my last slide, really, just to say that there is an ecosystem that we're all part of. And I think what comes across from the academic research into open innovation is that there needs to be sort of orchestration on 3 levels in order for innovation to work. There needs to be somebody that's bringing the whole ecosystem together, and typically that's done by governments and journalists and people running those sort of big, huge conferences with thousands of people. The communities of interest are often in each country relatively small. So the maritime sector here is very important for the country in Singapore, but it's probably only a few hundred or maybe 1,000 firms, I would have thought, if you really added it up. And then the actual circles of action tend to be communities of perhaps 8, 10 people, maybe 2 or 3 firms, something like that. So that's the sort of picture I use anyway when I'm thinking about open innovation. Let's plunge into a discussion then of why you might do it. Kristian, there are many ways that you could have spent your time as a startup. What was it that made you think about getting involved with a project like this?
So I think it's really a good way for a startup to get quick feedback from potential clients on, are we onto something that works here? You could traditionally go out and do cold call, you could try and contact individual companies, but you would spend a lot of time in identifying sort of the right person to talk to. Alternatively, there are sort of government tenders that you can start working on, but that's a whole ballpark of itself. But using these open innovation platforms and identifying which are relevant for you is a great way for you to get exposure to potentially 20, 30 relevant companies that have already thought about what is that they are looking for. They've identified the right person internally, and you can get face time in front of them. So I think it's really a uniquely suited way for startups to get exposure.
I think that's an incredibly important point, because we've all been taught about lean startup and design thinking, and the first step on that is empathy and discovery, isn't it? And yet, if you're doing a business-to-business venture, getting through to customers is incredibly hard. So thank you. That seems to be an incredibly valid reason. From your side, Nakul, looking at this, is it difficult to reach startups? Is it hard for corporates to reach startups, or are they besieged by people trying to sell them stuff the whole time?
I think it's a combination of things. I think, first of all, to go back to, if I could just answer the why a corporate from our perspective would do this, I think it's a recognition that, generally speaking, corporates of any size are doing probably okay, and that's what makes them attractive. But when you see an industry on the cusp of some type of transformation, some type of change, you suddenly have visions of 16-year-olds in garages disrupting your phenomenal business, and that kind of is a bit worrying. And I think the second thing, and why we chose specifically the term open innovation and wanted to, it was almost a symbol or a signal to the market saying, look, we've established this function, we've got somebody who's doing this. And it was really a recognition that the traditional boundaries of the organization, it just wasn't enough for us to do internal R&D. And so we needed to have a more permeable organizational boundary and start to get that culture change within our organization. It's okay to talk to a lot of different people, customers, suppliers, competitors, or whatever, to talk about how you can come together. What does the future look like? What areas do you work with? And I think in that context, these relationships suddenly change. Customers suddenly become suppliers, suppliers suddenly become competitors. And I think that entire dynamic really brought about a need from our side to kind of, let's say, open our doors and windows a bit.
And do you think that's, I can see in a business like international maritime business, inherently, you've got to work with partners, haven't you? For hundreds of years, shipping has involved trusting people at a distance, building relationships. Is that something that's unique about the maritime sector, or is it something that you've seen in other corporate sectors, Nakul?
Well, I think the concept of trusting people in order to execute transaction and business is perhaps common in many different sectors. I think where maritime becomes a little bit unique is there's a saying, right? When ships were made of wood and men were made of steel, communication just wasn't what it is today, and therefore those partnerships, that trust, who you know on the other side of the planet to look after your assets and so on and so forth, was extremely important. In the days now where ships are made of steel and perhaps men are made of wood, um, it's a totally different dynamic. And I think the concept of working together is still very, very strong. However, I have to say that shipping in general, yes, you work together, but you create these silos and very tight boundaries. I think what is changing now is, as you call it, circles of action, they are widening, and you're seeing greater connection across circles as well, and an understanding and an embracing that the maritime industry has its particularities in many respects, but it also understands that it can adapt and adopt from other industries rather than trying to reinvent the wheel on its own. And that's a
Thank you.
pretty big acceptance.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. So I'm going to come back to Kristian in a second, but I just wanted one more question, if I may, Nakul, on the sort of the framing of this inside a corporate. I've worked with many corporations in different sectors to help them implement innovation in the last few years. And what I've seen consistently is that corporations tend to pick up, a flavor or a methodology like running a hackathon or doing what they think of as an open innovation before they've got a proper framework internally for taking the results of that innovation through to reality.
Yeah.
What made it sounds like your companies thought quite deeply about innovation before you plunged into this, and presumably before they appointed you. What was that the case? Was there a clear innovation framework? What happens to ideas and how they turn into reality?
Well, a couple of different things. I think it would be it wouldn't be correct, and it would be a bit unrealistic to say that we've got an absolutely clear idea of every single path and the framework and all the methodologies. But at the same time, I mean, we're a 160-year-old company. We've had to undergo many different transformations across the time as the industry has changed or technology has changed. And in that context, the vision of our company is to shape the maritime industry. That kind of sets the bar quite high, and that creates a certain culture within the organization. So I think that's the first part. The second part is that on the ship service side and in the marine product side in particular, we're used to product development, of course, more industrial. We're also used to looking at how do you adapt and adopt and bring industrial products particular to the maritime space. That's really important. One of the areas that we landed on very quickly is utilizing our deep domain expertise and connecting it with technology skills. So we didn't wake up one morning and say, all right, we're going to become Google. I don't think that's realistic. But what is realistic is working in this industry for so many years. There's an immense competence that resides within the organization that understands pain points and so on and so forth. And how can we unleash that to create solutions that are perhaps more future relevant, at the same time recognizing limitations, and therefore holding up our hands and saying, we definitely have this gap, and therefore we need to talk to other people about that. You talked about culture. Can I just add, the technology is probably the easiest and the last issue that needs to be solved in all of these solutioning. It's really the capacity and the competence issue. I like to use 3 is a magic number for me, and I always connect things with C's. So in my world, it's capacity, competence, and culture. So when we're thinking about innovation and our own frameworks and pathways, we're still uncovering, we're still discovering, but I think to some degree we have understood that it isn't the events, create a lab and a skunk works and a do a hackathon and do this and do that, but it's really understanding that these events have their place within what outcome we want to achieve. And when I talked about a spectrum of scaling internally or spinning out, it's about understanding that there is a spectrum, and then you experiment along the lines of that spectrum based on an outcome you want to achieve.
Gotcha. No, that makes complete sense. Moving back to Kristian now. Kristian, when I teach companies to do customer discovery, I typically teach them to go out and ask a potential customer to tell us about a problem situation and try to articulate that. It sounds like when you're reaching out to a corporate, the kinds of questions you need to ask are sort of multi-dimensional, aren't they? You don't just need to know about their immediate need, but it sounds like you need to find out, are these people I'm going to be able to work with? What were the questions that were in your mind when you wanted access to a corporate?
I mean, one of the big issues when you're trying to reach out to a corporate, that really as soon as they have more than 200 employees, you're going to start to see people go into silos. And just because you contact one silo and one project manager there, doesn't mean that a project manager in the same silo isn't going to be interested or is going to be interested. So simply identifying and then getting through various stage gates of getting to that person and getting feedback is really the difficult part of this. And that's where I see the beauty of open innovation, that the stakeholder who either knows who to contact across a large part of the organization is present there, or is someone who has the capacity they are able to make a decision. And that's really what you want to identify in organizations. No, it's not about being able to scale this up and earn millions and billions in a collaboration. It's about getting that first prototype project off the ground. And that's really about people connection.
I find that really interesting, because I think a lot of people, when they think about open innovation, would think there's a very specific challenge statement that the company's published, and my job is to kind of try and as best as possible hit that challenge statement. But it sounds like to me you're much more interested in building a long-term relationship, and you're much more interested in trying to figure out what do they really want, what's behind that challenge statement. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, so I think the collaboration we had with Wilhelmsen is actually a great example of this. I think we went through another open innovation platform where, you know, it really wasn't relevant to what we were doing, but we just submitted anyway, because you never know. And Nakul identified, you know, it's not really where we're focusing on this, but let me introduce you to someone else in the organization. Now that didn't work out, so we can go into that. How, you know, especially the customers who are not buying are actually the most valuable resource for you to keep talking to. But it's really about identifying which companies do you think you have a value proposition to show to them, and then identify and go for them.
Gotcha. And I'm wondering how much of a common language you felt was established when you tried to deal with larger companies. When I talk about corporations doing innovation, I often use that 3 horizons model for anyone that's familiar with it. Horizon 1 being technology that we already understand and business models that we already know. That innovation there looks mostly like procurement. Horizon 2 is stuff that's adjacent to that. So either, you know, technologies that are just coming down the line, or new markets that are just next door to us. And then Horizon 3 is the stuff that's still in the lab and is completely unexplored. When you've engaged with large corporations, how have they signaled to you? Are they really trying to do procurement? Are they interested in having, you know, a little bit of stretch, but nothing too scary? Or we really want wacky ideas? How clear a picture have you got from corporations about the scope of innovation they want?
I think it's become a lot easier to be a startup in that sense, in that those 3 horizons are really being set up in departments today, or it's much easier. So Horizon 1 is really procurement or internal research and development. So if you have a product that is ready for that, my general advice is, if you are a startup, if you identify yourself as a startup or a scale-up, you want to stay away from procurement as long as possible. And keep focusing on either people who have a experience out on site, so the operational department, or identify these open innovation or skunk works type of labs that corporates have set up. They have a multitude of different names, but they're covering more or less the same idea, saying what is out there that we haven't identified.
Right. So we have a multitude of different names, multitude of different events, a multitude of different people within a corporation. To me, that's a really important thing for startups to grasp, because I think when you approach a big name company, you assume, well, these guys must all be singing the same tune. But Nakul, that's not the case, is it?
No, far from it. I think it's really great that you bring up the horizon concept. In our own division in marine products, for example, we're really clear. Horizon 1 sits with our line management. It's continuous improvement, and it is about consuming solutions for and much less about co-creating, and therefore much less actually about this open innovation and let's get together and work together type of thing. It's much more transactional. You give me something, I pay you something. Thank you very much. When I have a problem, I'll give you a call. Horizon 2, we actually thinking about dividing Horizon 2 into 2A and 2B because companies are under pressure where the core business also needs to expand and flex its muscle a little bit and stretch its boundaries. And that's kind of the 2A piece, where the core business is looking for not just continuous improvement, but maybe just a close adjacency, but something that they can see, touch, and feel and understand. And then you've got the 2B and the 3 areas, which is much more investigative. And that's really, I guess, from our perspective, where I sit and where I look at. And the difference between 2B and 3 is really just, it's about timelines and it's about traction metrics and it's about recognizing, it's a balance sheet play rather than a P&L play, because that's part of this culture change as well that corporates have to come with. Really easy to allocate capital and then next quarter say, where's the return?
So just for anyone, thank you very much. I think there's a whole lot in there, and I just wanted to unpack a little bit of it. You talked about a balance sheet play or a P&L play. One of my own experiences, when I set up, co-founded the first startup accelerator here in Southeast Asia, and we're very grateful to Singtel Innovate, the corporate venture fund within Singtel, for supporting us as a sponsor through the first year of our operation. That was an interesting relationship because it started off, because they were a fund, a corporate venture fund, we started off, I think, both sides of that relationship thinking that it was going to be about creating investments for Singtel. In other words, that it would be what I think you're calling a balance sheet investment. But can you just tell us about the sort of spectrum of different possible relationships? Because investing, buying services, there are all sorts of different ways that a corporate and a startup could work together, aren't there? Can you just sort of list out some of those for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of it as a spectrum. I think on one end of the spectrum, and I think this is where corporates need to think very carefully on coming back to the why. If you're looking, and this is to all the corporates, if you're looking to consume next generation solutions because you want to improve internal efficiencies and so on and so forth, that's a transactional play. That's a P&L play. That is where you're actually looking for a little bit more mature, probably looking for a scale up. If it's a startup, it has to have landed something quite meaningful, because otherwise it's a very difficult relationship to deal with. And then right on the other end of the spectrum is where you're coming in because you want to co-create something to offer to the market. That means that from a corporate perspective, you're probably looking at either a separate business line, or even if you're thinking of it as an investment, you're thinking of it in terms of, this is a strategic investment that I probably want to be related to in some way, shape, or form. Then you have the absolute far end of the spectrum moving on, is where some corporates have set up, CVC funds. They've set up kind of this very VC type feel. And that is a pure sort of, what is my return, what is my financial, it doesn't matter whether there's a relationship to my core business or not. I consider that to be not strategic capital. And I think along that spectrum, there's many different intermediate plays. So for example, a little bit greater than consumption is, all right, corporate and startup get together. They get together because the product is very interesting. We want to consume the product, but also we find it interesting, so we want to take some aligned stake in the growth. We want an aligned philosophy that the bigger the startup grows, we want to be able to introduce it and so on and so forth, and we want to play in that area. So rather than paying to consume the product, you're actually getting an equity stake in return for offering information, etc. Then you move further along the spectrum, and then you've got scenarios where there are pure equity plays. Corporates are offering some level of unfair advantage, whether it's customer intimacy or operational capability, and there's a very aligned initiative, and that's almost like a JV sort of scenario. And then you move along to the pure financials, and in that is the understanding on whether it's a P&L versus balance sheet play.
That's incredibly helpful. I mean, thank you. I've stuck up on the screen here for anyone. I hope it's sharing again. One representation of this Three Horizons model. These guys, Naji and Tuff, put it forward in 2012. You can check the reference, or I can email it to you, anyone who's interested. Here's a picture of yesterday's, today's, and tomorrow's technology. Here's the kind of business models and the places that we sell. And I think what you were saying is, down here is procurement. As we move up through here, we might be into co-developing stuff. And by the time we're getting out to Horizon 3, maybe we're talking about technology licensing or distribution partnerships, something like that. So is that correct? Have I got the right sense of what you were saying there, Nakul?
Yeah, I think so. Largely, I think there's a little bit of a. It's not automatically a one-to-one relationship between the financial relationship versus the intent to participate in terms of building something. But largely speaking, yes, I think it aligns.
Gotcha.
I think these are some of the tough questions. Startups should not be shy to ask the corporate, why are you talking to us? What do you want out of this?
Yeah. And recently I won't name who it was, but it was a client we have at NUS Enterprise, a very large client here, that is approaching this for the very first time. And what I picked up running a seminar internally with them is that they have very, very diverse views internally. Many of the people who were setting up this internal innovation don't understand the difference between procurement and investing in a company, because they've never had to deal with that. They're operational people or something like that. Kristian, if I come back to you, when you're a small startup, you're going to someone with a very impressive sounding title in a corporate, vice president, or so, and you suddenly realize they haven't got a clue what they're talking about when it comes to innovation. How do you deal with that situation?
I think, bringing back to the Horizon part, I think it's also about you as a startup to be able to lead and say, you need to set up the dream team for us to be a success internally in your organization. So that means if you're in Horizon 2, you're talking to an innovation department, it's very important to identify that their job is usually to create prototypes and then lead them into the operational side of the business to then create value. And that's also, from a startup perspective, where the big money is. So it's about you to help the corporate to also identify, I think we create value in our case, either in operational and maintenance sectors or in training sectors, which is usually under HR. And then say, before we start a project, before we do anything, we need to make sure that we have people from that Horizon 1 who can either say, this creates value for us, or this does not create value for us. Because otherwise you're later on going to find it's very, very difficult to move further down the horizons and closer into core business, which is where you can have a long-term partnership.
So the decision makers may not be in the room. That it's quite possible that the people sitting opposite you may be very friendly and very supportive, but have no actual ability to say yes to a project.
Yeah, so you often have like the person who might not know about innovation or operations, they might be a decision maker. So we usually, there's sort of three overall types of people you will find, at least from our perspective. There is a decision maker. Those are the people with budget responsibility. That would be procurement in Horizon 1, but it might be more or less everyone who's involved in Horizon 2 and 3. Then there is a user. So they are the ones who can say this creates value long-term, and a decision maker can only go so far without the support of the user. You really need to convince the user about this. And then the last part is, I think Asian culture has a huge advantage in this, that you have a concept called guangxi, who internally knows the right people, who has the experience knowing exactly how do you work in the bureaucracy of an organization. And if you can get people, if you find people who have low guangxi, it can often be difficult to move quickly. So also identifying where are they in the organization and which part of the organization do they have this informal relationship to.
I think that's incredibly perceptive, and I want to come back, Nakul, in a minute. As someone who's grown up across cultures and experienced working in different cultures, I'd love to come to you on that. But I just want to ask about the human experience, Kristian. How did you find that stuff out? Because that sounds like that could be incredibly awkward to deal with. You come in as a startup thinking, hey, I've got a product I want to sell to this corporate, or I'd love to work with these guys. And then you discover that there's this whole 10 times layer of complexity you didn't realize. How did that feel for you guys? And how did you begin to navigate it? Because it sounds like you've gone a long way.
Well, we started 10 years ago, and really the first 3 years, we didn't make any money.
Right.
We were just making these experiences. So again, we made mistakes. So if you look at the sum total of what I've done over those 10 years, I think 98, 99% of them have been utter failures. So you
Right.
learn most from those, I find.
Yes, absolutely. Nakul, I raised this question of working across cultures in the broadest sense. I mean, within a company, you have different cultures, don't you? You have operational culture, you have financial culture, you have, very strategic culture, often at the board level. And then you've got literally, cultures in terms of, Norwegians, Asians, whatever. How does someone begin to navigate all that stuff?
Yeah, that's a huge question, and it's probably the critical path for innovation as such. I want to pick up on one thing that Kristian mentioned to lead into the question, Hugh. It's really, really important that you find the intrapreneur within that organization, somebody who knows enough people but also has enough credibility that people want to listen, and also understands what can go through kind of the enterprise system and what needs to be done on the fringes but is still acceptable. And that's really important, and that I think is really the Guanxi aspect of it, because it is around that. I also think that, look, there needs to be an aligned interest and therefore incentive to work on this stuff. When operational, or when people who are really busy with day-to-day, let's use the word survival, then this kind of thing is a nice to have, but really I don't have the time for it, because it doesn't change my life today and probably doesn't do it tomorrow. And I have absolutely no incentive mechanism for me to be able to engage in this. And then you have the strategic side where they've got a completely different view and they're looking longer term. And how you bridge that is to understand that corporates have a responsibility for bringing some kind of interest and incentive within their teams to push the boundaries. It starts from there, and it starts from the top. The second thing is, I think for startups, so we're in a very interesting scenario. We're of course a big corporate, but on the other side we have ventures, which are kind of startups themselves, and so we're experiencing both sides of this. Choose your customers carefully. It isn't always the biggest that are going to be the most valuable in the beginning. You want use cases. I think it's really important to clarify the burning platform that the startup is working in that will resonate with one set of stakeholders.
And by burning platform, you mean something that's urgent, something that people have got to take action on. Yeah.
Absolutely, that it's important, that this makes a difference to my life. And the second thing is articulate a compelling value proposition, because that will resonate with another group of stakeholders. And the third one is explain the solution, but keep it simple, because probably the IT department's the last department to get involved here. So you wanna sort of say that this is solvable, this is easy, let's have a conversation. So I think that's something on the language side that is really important. But again, it comes back to really important to think about again, the magic of three, right? It's the physics, the chemistry, and the math. So the physics is the solution you're putting forward. The math is you've got to have your numbers stack up. Because the worst thing you want to do is to go on a discovery journey with neither party trying to figure out what they're looking for. That's not a good thing. And the third one is it boils down to chemistry. It really does.
That's a fantastic analysis, and it reminds me of the surprise I had. I spent 30 years as an entrepreneur. I began my career in a large organization, the BBC and GC Marconi Electronics, but I spent most of my time. It was a surprise to me to see on some MBA friends' LinkedIn profiles, there was a lot of stuff about influencing skills. And I thought, well, what the hell is that? And then I realized actually in a corporate environment, that's incredibly important, isn't it? Because you've got all these different people who've got to take part in a decision. And unless a startup is clear about how that decision is going to get made and who's going to influence that decision, then the worst possible outcome will happen, which is they don't say yes and they don't say no, and you're burning up time and your runway is running out and you're thinking, why are these guys making a decision? Yeah.
And sorry, you just to add, and remember that on the corporate side, each function is a department, and on the startup side, it's one poor guy trying to navigate all of this. And then the other aspect is on the corporate side, and this is the reality. The B2C innovation space influences the individuals. The B2B innovation space is a different space. And trying to understand those differences is really where if I can use the word, the smart startups really know how to leverage some of the good stuff, but also recognize the stakeholder management in the B2B space.
So I'm going to say that if you've been in this for 10 years, Kristian, you must be an incredibly patient man. Is that the essential quality that's required for a startup that wants to work with corporate?
I would call it something different. I would say it requires grit, the perseverance and sticking to it and forgetting your failures and remembering your successes. I think that's the important part of this. But it's also, I mean, definitely I could have done a lot of stuff to shorten that period down looking back. But really also one of the things I've learned is that it's a very good idea to be upfront about this costing something. Charge 5,000, 10,000 Singapore dollars for something, depending on where they are in the organization and what you need. So you don't need to make money on the project. I don't think you should in the beginning, but get them to commit something to the pot. That's usually always possible if this creates value for people. And it gets you through the next hoop of, you get to look at their NDAs, their procurement contracts. You find out a lot of information, because if you spend 2 months trying to go to a process and they really like it, but they want to own everything in the contract because they haven't cleared this with legal that it's a startup collaboration, you're going to be disappointed or selling the whole thing for nothing.
Yes. In my own experience, I had a collaboration experience, which I can talk about openly because they were very open about it. It was with Bosch here in Singapore. And it was extraordinary, the different perceptions within that large engineering group. As you say, once legal got involved, that was fascinating because they were used to doing deals between large corporations. So all their agreements are like, 100 pages. And there was a point, and the level of the kind of issues that came up, in order to have a joint venture with us, it turned out that we actually had to get clearance for anti-competitive relationships within the European Union, which meant we had to get a legal ruling secured in Slovenia. Like, we're not doing business in Slovenia, but that because Bosch does, that was, it was extraordinary, the level of insight. We've got about 20 minutes left. I'm finding this fascinating because there's so many parts of this that clearly are not being shared at the moment, which is why I hope this is very much the beginning of a conversation. Just in terms of sort of the three, say for you, Kristian, if there were three things that you could do differently now, based on the last 10 years, what are the top three things that you would do differently?
I would be much better at walking away if things aren't progressing quickly. If there's not happening something new every week or every second week, depending on the organization size, I would have just walked away. Then I would have gotten a accountant much quicker. It's much easier to get that cleared out to begin with. I'm not a business person, I'm a technician, so definitely get that cleared out to begin with. And then I think I would probably have looked more at getting an investment to begin with, because let's be honest, if you're losing money, it's much more fun to lose other people's money.
And when you say getting an investment, would you mean an investment from a company or an investment from a non-corporate source?
I think it doesn't matter, but again, I've been bootstrapping the last 10 years, so we've done it without any type of investment. So I would have spent a lot more time learning what are different type of funding your company, either from established VCs, accelerator programs, or corporate VC arms.
Gotcha. And by the way, I've been doing some talks recently about go-to-market strategy and also about funding for deep technology ventures. I'll make sure that I post the links for those later on in the Q&A, so if anyone wants to follow up can do that. Nakul, from your point of view, just remind us when you started on this journey of doing open innovation with startups, and what are the three big learning points for you?
Well, I guess working with startups and sort of innovation has been for several years, but our open innovation function as it is now is coming up to its first birthday. And I guess the three big things for me, I think, is from a corporate standpoint, be honest on what you're actually seeking. It's best to be honest about that and have that conversation clearly. I think the second thing is that look at it as a true partnership and not as a supplier. If you are serious about co-creating, and if you are looking at consuming, then treat it as a supplier and say it's a supplier. And I think the third one is this isn't a winner takes all game. It's too early in our industry and our process. So we just have to be ready that things are going to change and there are going to be different players coming in.
Right. And when you think of the things not to do, perhaps I can go back to those. So things that you would do, things that you would not do, or recommend that people absolutely stay away from.
Oh, there's quite a
What are
few.
the biggest,
I think
the three biggest mistakes, I suppose, that you see out there other people making?
pretending like you're going to become a Google when you're actually a shipping company. I think the other mistake is to automatically assume that 3 programmers, 2 data scientists, and a CDO is the answer to all your problems. Stick them in a corner office, and that'll fix everything. It's about making sure that corporates understand they've got a lot of competence in the domain. Connect the competence up. And I guess the third do not do is don't go in spending a lot of money right in the beginning when you're not even sure where the solution is going. Just like startups need to bootstrap, I think corporates need to be better at making sure that their own ventures and initiatives are bootstrapped as well, or at least funded with very clear traction metrics.
Right. So it sounds like a huge amount of learning is required on both sides here. Are either of you aware, I mean, Kristian, are you aware of anywhere online? Did you discuss the issues involved in open innovation anywhere online? Is there anywhere that's talking about how to do this well and how to do this badly?
Usually, if you start, so as a startup, it's insanely easy. Especially in Singapore, there's various of these aggregating open innovation platforms. Go in there, start sending out submissions, because you get quite good feedback if you don't get accepted, and if you get in, they're usually quite quick to get feedback. And there's also a good discussion in those groups and the follow-up part of this. And then I think, especially these accelerators where you can sit for a period, there's a lot of them in the PIER71 area. Block 71 area. Start engaging with the community and make sure that you share experiences with other startups and these accelerator parts. That's really the best place.
Have you ever been able to get in touch with other startups that a corporate's already worked with? I mean, is there a sort of a back channel where you can go and talk to someone and say, has anyone else worked with this business before? What worked, what didn't work? How are they structured? Is anything like that going on that you're aware of?
I think it's a good idea. I've never seen it. I think it would be a good idea for corporates to have this and say, we have other startups that are not competitors with you, but we've been working with them for years and we really like the collaboration. So have an hour talk with them of saying, how do they communicate with us? I think that would be a good idea to have.
Maybe that's the kind of conversation. Yeah, maybe that's the kind of conversation we could facilitate at PIER71. And Nakul, would it feel, I mean, one of the things about working with a corporation, I think from a startup's point of view, one of the things that's so complicated is you're dealing with a creature with many heads. You're not talking to one thing, you're talking to many things. Understanding that is the case is a big paradigm shift. And then understanding how to map out what's inside the corporation is also a challenge. Is there anything that you can see that corporates would be comfortable doing to make it easier to navigate them?
I think opening up, really. I think LinkedIn is a great platform for reaching out to other people. I think that startups should reach out on LinkedIn to people, and sometimes you won't get responses, and sometimes you will. I think that I would encourage that. The maritime corporate innovation community is very small. So I would encourage people who are in the maritime industry to reach out to other people that you think you've heard in the news or that have done something or that you know about. Reach out and say, cup of coffee, virtual coffee, can I just ask you some questions? I really think that human beings are still, very social animals. And I think that the general tendency would be to share. At least that's my experience, and of course then you'll find the boundaries where you don't want to share. Can I also just say that I'm actually an ambassador for the Maritime Digitalization Playbook by the Maritime Port Authority, MPA. And one of the challenges in maritime is corporates and even small and medium enterprises, SMEs and large companies, they don't really know how to go on to this journey? How do you start to become digitalized? How do you start to know what questions to ask? And I would strongly recommend to link up, reach out, and try to see if you can get hold of the playbook. It's available on the NPA website, to at least start to have those conversations internally. The first step is really to get that mindset shift. The skill sets will come.
I thought it was interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Kristian. Yeah, go ahead.
So just to follow up on that, and I think that's also a culture change or culture difference. So we have a saying in entrepreneurship in Denmark that you need to be cheeky as a butcher's dog. You know, a dog in a butcher shop is very good at identifying when stuff hits the ground and be there immediately. And I think that might be something, at least I'm seeing that an Asian culture is not too good at promoting this. You know, you need to immediately be there. If you see the CEO, he's giving a talk and he's standing at the buffet, you know, make sure you're standing next to him. Jump in, say, hey, great presentation. You know, are you looking for collaborations? You know, be nice, be courteous, especially considering the different culture differences, but you need to be there, you know, contact a lot of people. It's okay if you only have a response rate of 2% of those you contact. It just means you need to contact a lot more people, and it's okay.
I think that's fantastic advice. I mean, my own experience is that, thinking about something you said, Nakul, you talked about finding a sort of entrepreneur within the organization, a champion, someone who can represent you inside the company, not necessarily a decision maker. They might be someone who's just respected and influential. I've often found that there are sort of perhaps late middle-aged people who've been in a company for a long time, and they're the kind of people who are allowed to say what needs to be said, and they're the kind of people who've mentored a lot of junior people in the organization. If you can find that person, exactly as you're saying, Kristian, they're often very interested to talk to entrepreneurs. I think it's worth remembering that from the point of view of someone who's been stuck inside a cubicle for 25 years working in a large company, entrepreneurs look like rock stars. You know, they're up there on stage doing this sort of dangerous, crazy, interesting stuff, and you're stuck there in your cubicle, and actually you can't do that because you've got a wife and kids, or sort of husband, kids, whatever, and and so you're interested to talk. People are curious to talk to entrepreneurs. What I've noticed here in Asia is that sometimes people are very concerned about, well, what am I allowed to say? You know, what does the company let me say? So a crucial piece of advice I was given when I first came to Singapore was try to have a coffee with people independently. You know, if you can take someone to the kopitiam here, and one-on-one, must be one-on-one, cannot be three people. If there are three people in the room, then you get face issues and all sorts of stuff coming up. But if it's just you and a person, you can talk to each other like ordinary human beings over a cup of, you know, kopi or kosong, and then you can have a conversation. And often you'll find that the person sitting opposite you is actually really frustrated, wants to make things happen, doesn't know how, and wants to have a back channel discussion with you. Nakul, how would your company see those kinds of private discussions going on? Obviously, we're not releasing confidential commercial information about the business, but being relatively open about how things actually work.
So I think, again, it comes back to company culture. It comes back to the person, the entrepreneur, let's call him that, needs to be confident, needs to have credibility. And a certain amount of gravitas, and I think the company culture it needs to not view these conversations as something happening in a dark back alley. These are conversations about, look, companies need their employees to look out of the window and see what's going on in the marketplace. Where is capital being allocated? What are startups up to? That's a really good temperature gauge on what is the next big thing. And so I think that part of this culture has to be that these are not secretive and dingy conversations. These are conversations that company employees should be proud about having. It's about building the network. Startups should be proud about having. If something connects, great. If something doesn't connect, see you later till the next coffee. It's absolutely fine.
So what I'm hearing from you both is actually ask for forgiveness, not for permission. That's the expression that's sometimes used. You know, be willing to take a risk in terms of starting a new relationship. And if you don't get back what you want from it, if you're not getting clear communication, if you're not getting action, then read into that. If someone doesn't want to talk to you, they don't want to talk to you, and they're not going to talk to you, and that they're not worth bothering with. I'm going to move now into the Q&A, if I may, just to let everyone know, in the chat side of things, there's a couple of links that I've posted to other talks about raising money for deep tech, and also the different channels through which to do that, and also one about go-to-market strategy. I should also say, I should have said right at the beginning that, you know, for anyone who hasn't been part of PIER71 before, it's the Port Innovation System Ecosystem Reimagined. It's a program set up by MPA and NUS Enterprise to grow a maritime innovation ecosystem centered here. I think you can see a URL link to that in the chat. What I'm going to do now is move into the 4 questions and answers that we've got so far. Anyone else who wants to pose questions, please do so. If we can't answer them directly here, we'll make sure we follow up with you by email. So Chris Crawley has posted a story and a question. He sells into the maritime sector. And a few years ago, he spoke to a large maritime player about a product with a compelling business case and was told, this looks great, but we've downsized our new market evaluation team from 15 people to 2, so we're too busy to talk to you. How do you get attention when you're faced by a company that perhaps might be in a downturn situation? Shall I push that to Nakul first?
Straightforward. I think I mentioned it. Timing is everything. Identify the burning platform, because that is what is going to be important to them, even with 2 people. Articulate your value proposition super clearly, and then try to look for a solution discussion. What you don't want to do is to say, I've got a great solution. Nobody understands what you're solving.
So listen first, understand the problem. Kristian, would you also take, if someone said to you they've downsized their team and it's going to be difficult to have a conversation, would you take that as a negative signal and think, well, maybe I'll move on to someone else, or would you still persist in that kind of situation?
Definitely move on. If they downsize from 15 people to 2, they're not interested in doing this anymore. They're just interested in wrapping up whatever they have ongoing now, and then fire these 2 people and move them to other areas.
Gotcha.
I think maybe also follow up on the other. I heard a very, very good The Economist have these sector reports coming out, and they had one recently on the maritime sector in general. And actually, they said that even though you would expect maritime to be in a downward spiral or pressured right now, that's not really the case, because they're working on a boom bust cycle. So when things are going great, you order a lot of new ships and they get delivered when you're in a downward spiral. So that just puts even more pressure on price. But actually, They said that the last crisis, people didn't order a lot of new ships. So even though we're in a downward spiral, it's not really putting that much pressure on the prices in general. So I think that there's not really, I think when you are in a downward spiral, that's when you have an opportunity as a small startup to really get in there, because you're on a burning platform. So people are starting to look not just at optimizing operations, but looking at what can we do to get an edge or a leg up in the market.
And picking up, I agree with that. And picking up on something Nakul said, you were saying, Nakul, sometimes people think, oh, we can do this ourselves. We'll just hire a couple of data scientists. We can be a startup internally. If you've got downward pressure and there's a reduction of headcount, then it might be there's a more realistic discussion with a startup, might it?
Absolutely, and you've got to connect that up in that way. And I think what Kristian's mentioning is also really important, because the maritime industry is a ginormous canvas, and to say that the industry is in a downturn is really quite a misnomer. I think there's 2 things. One is certain parts of the industry are under pressure for certain reasons. There's a massive regulatory influence that's coming on top. But that's just another opportunity space, because the customers are desperate, or the industry is desperate to see, how can I simply navigate compliance, and how do I make sure that I'm not only doing minimum compliance, but perhaps using this as a competitive advantage versus the others. These are what startup entrepreneurs that I would recommend to read into this opportunity spaces and move on. But you've got to be very clear on what are you offering and what problem are you solving. I think too many times I hear, here's a solution, but nobody's very clear on what the problem is we're solving.
Yeah, and just picking up on what you were saying about compliance, I mean, I'm always telling people selling B2B, if you can come up with a solution that pleases the legal department because it hits compliance, cuts costs because it helps, that the CFO is going to love that. And if it creates new revenue, the CEO is going to love that as well. So if you can hit 2 out of those 3 things, it gets you through the door. If you can hit all 3, then You're well aware.
You got a deal. Then you're going to get bought out.
Yes. Kristian, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Was there something else that you were just going to say?
Yeah, I think we're in a very golden opportunity in the maritime space right now. There is the massive legal pressure. There is, it's one of the industries that are still going on during this crisis. People still need to get basic stuff transported. And I can't remember where I heard it, but there was some talk about a lot of the big ship owners, that there's a new generation coming on the scene. And that usually also means that the bank vaults are starting to get open. There's a new strategic focus, which also means there's a lot of opportunities out there.
Gotcha. So someone else's problem is your opportunity. Now, there's another issue here, which thank you, Marcus Chen, for posting a question about customization. I think one of the challenges for startups often is you work in depth with one company, you create a product, and then you go to another one and they want something that's quite like what you've done, but they want a whole bunch of other features and things, and you end up having to spend a huge amount of energy customizing it for somebody else. Have you found that, Kristian, or have you been able to create solutions which will scale because they address multiple clients' needs?
I find you need to customize first, and then you need to see if this can scale. Because as Chris also said, they hired 15 people just to research this open innovation. Remember that usually for a startup, having one client in the maritime space is more than enough for you to get the BMW you want. Start making value in that one company first, and then look at seeing how can we scale this? What are the barriers for selling to the next client?
Gotcha. I mean, there's a general feature, I think, in SaaS startups. People would say if you're developing a software as a service business online, if you can satisfy 80% of people's needs, there will always be other people saying, could you just do this? Could you just do that? Could you just do that? But you have to leave that 20% of extra features and requirements to one side, because otherwise you're in a bespoke software business, really. Nakul, do you have anything on this issue of customization and scaling?
I think it comes back to why, the why of the relationship. I think if it's about consumption and that's what you're happy with, then of course customize. If it's about co-creation, then frankly, the corporate should accept that you need to talk to many customers to land on a solution so that you've got a product market fit, and then you won't actually have the problem. Not a big fan of customizing if it's actually a product that needs to go out very widely.
Gotcha, thank you. Got two very practical questions. I think we'll probably have to call it a day at that point. The first one is, and there may be just a very short answer to this, it may or may not be possible. Is there any way to shorten the cycle when you're engaging with innovation officers? The kind of people who sit on your startup, the deck on your startup, and they circulate it internally and nothing happens. Is there any way to short circuit that at all, Nakul?
Unfortunately not. I think timing is everything in this game. I think that if you've got the deck, so one thing I have to say from personal experience, nothing is more irritating than spamming like 50 people in the one corporate with the one deck, and then we're running around in circles, and then everybody assumes somebody else is going to do something, and that's not a good idea.
Right.
But I think, it comes back again. Articulate what you really want to do. If it is meaningful and the timing is right, it will click. If it's not clicking, it's not right.
Would you pick that up too, Kristian? In other words, rather than trying to shorten the process, maybe you shorten the process, which is if you're getting no response, walk away. Maybe it's as simple as that.
Coming back to Nakul's power of 3, send 3 emails over 2 weeks. If you don't get a reply, don't keep spamming, and then don't send emails out to 3 or 4 people. Always send emails to one person, and then maybe 1 or 2 on CC, because otherwise, everyone assumed someone did something about it and no one did. So always send emails to one person and say, I would really like you to do something.
And I think I've also learned you have to be careful about the CCs, because you don't know what the internal politics are. If you write to one person and actually that information needs phrasing in a different way, they can do that before it's passed on. Whereas if you CC everybody, you may just hit the wrong note and it's like, it's not going to go anywhere. Last question here, which is from Joanne Land. Thank you very much. She says, Kristian, how important is it to demonstrate valuation realization to corporations? Will you say this is the most important factor to determine whether or not you'll win the contract? So I'm not sure whether she means valuation realization in terms of an equity relationship, or whether she means how important is it to demonstrate that you create value for the corporation. Do you just want to reflect on that for us?
Yeah, so I don't know that much about valuation, and I think customers don't care about it. They care about what you can do for them. Valuation is something you talk about with VCs. When it comes to generating value, I think it's essential. You need to figure out if you are on a need to have or a nice to have basis. And if you're on a nice to have basis, this is the wrong timing. They work when economies are going up, and it's usually just get as much money out as quickly as possible and then sell off.
Gotcha.
You know, you need to generate value, and the corporates I find will be very honest about that.
Gotcha. And Joanne, thank you for clarifying that you meant value realization. I do appreciate that. We are just over time, so I think we probably need to wrap up at this point. And so I'll let Priscilla know that we're coming to the end. And can I just remind everybody that there's a crash course in marketing for entrepreneurs that PIER71 will be running soon. Do you want to talk about that, Priscilla? And it looks like actually the information that you need on that course is actually on the screen. So I think the thing to do there maybe would be to scan that QR code and connect up if you do want to be part of that marketing workshop. Well, at this point, I'll say thank you very much indeed to everybody who's involved in this, not just our two fantastic panelists. I really appreciate your openness, the honesty and authenticity with which you've explored this interesting topic. If anyone of us has burning questions that they want to address, which we haven't covered, then please do pick them up with us by email. If there's enough interest, we could run something else that picks up on some of these issues. And thank you very much, everybody. Please stay safe and enjoy your time as part of PIER71. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks all. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.